Welcome everyone to the Pantheon. I'm your host Ray, and today we're looking at Underworld, the 2003 film starring Kate Beckinsale and Scott Speedman, directed by Len Wiseman. When you think of the vampire films, I mean True Blood, the Twilight series. Well, this predates all of that. The actual True Blood wouldn't air on HBO for another couple more years. The book for Twilight wasn't even published yet. It'd be another year or so before it actually gets publication. The only thing that predates this would be Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it had its series finale 3 months before the movie's release. So Buffy season 7, the finale aired on May 2003. The film Underworld debuted, hit theaters on September of the same year. So if you were a fan of Buffy like I was, and Angel, and you knew you're going to have a bit of a lull missing that show, you could say it had a built-in audience ready to go because they needed their next something to get them over that hump for missing Buffy. So you could say the audience was almost built in for the show. So you had a huge fan base of Whedon's the Whedonverse looking for something, and they were able to get that in Selene, a very powerful, strong female role. Yes, kind of like, and keeping in mind too, this was also the time of The Matrix. Just really it came out in 2000. It came out in 1999. So it was like 3 years later, and Matrix, the trilogy, was about to hit theaters too, around, and actually I think later that year, November. So you were in because she had the black leather like Trinity. So, and she was jumping off rooftops, and very, very dynamic like Trinity. So there's a lot to go on to you can marry some iconographies of film and television into this. So, and it was a sci-fi. So we were still going through the idea of bullet time and the action genre, because movies like The Mummy came out as well. And this was high end. Well, I don't know if we want to call it high end, but that thrill, that niche market, that early 2000s market, hitting all those boxes to getting the audience you wanted. And this movie was really well received. It doubled its budget. I think it had a budget of 52 million. It made 111 million in the box office worldwide. It was critically received very well. I mean, there was some things wrong with it story wise, but in general, it was a very fleshed out story. It complemented the sequel, which will be coming out later on. This movie, in essence, set up in motion what would be a trilogy and ended up being 5 films. But Len Wiseman had his fingers on the first one and the second one. He didn't have the second movie completely fleshed out, but there was enough here to work on. So this would be the blueprint of what was to come. And it was very well received. It opened at #1 in the box office. At the time, it beat out Brokeback Mountain, Glory Road, Last Holiday with Queen Latifah, and Hoodwink. So, Underworld. Story, very simple. It's a story of vampires and werewolves. Now, the thing is about this that I was not used to seeing was it deposits a world where vampires and werewolves, or lycans, which will explain what lycans are, most likely in the trilogy, on the third film. But for now, we'll just assume they're werewolves in a general sense, that they are immortal, both sides. I have fought with that because my understanding, even to that point, that vampires, yes, they were immortal, but werewolves was just human beings inflicted with a curse. But they were not immortal. So in this particular world, it's almost as it would have that kind of implication that they were both immortals. And then the explanation behind that kind of is given to you in the sequel. Now the film was shot in Romania, Hungary, and Transylvania, and because it has that, I guess honestly they wanted to give you that gothic feel, and it's pretty dark. I mean, the whole series is pretty dark, and it does give it to you. Paul Haslinger was part of an electronical group called Tangerine Dreams, and some of his work that he's involved in kind of reflects that. He's done a lot of he's an award-winning composer, and he's done work both television and film. For me, the most notable for me is the AMC series Halt and Catch Fire, which intro was very much an electronic sound because it's a computer show. He also did the sound composing the Fear of the Walking Dead. And most recently, he did Monster Hunter with Mila Jovovich. So he's been around for a number of years, and I like some of his sounds and music. I'm actually a fan of. And some of the films, if you look up his IMDb, you'd be surprised the amount of work he's done. I think he's done like over 70 projects, according to IMDb. I could be wrong, but he is quite versatile. He's been around for a very long time, and he went on to do, I think, three more Underworld films. Also, two more Underworld films, totaling three in the collection. And working with Len Wiseman, it's unique. Now, Wiseman, who okay, now behind the scenes, life is more interesting than fiction, or stranger than fiction. She was married to the co-star at this time, which was Michael Sheen, and ended up marrying the director. And so by the time you get to Evolution, she was already married to Len Wiseman. So what was going on behind the scenes, I'm sure, was more exciting or more unbelievable, if you will, stranger than fiction, if you will, than what's going on in the air. Both Wiseman, Sheen, and her sort of handpicked Scott Speedman because they knew him. I don't know if he was a neighbor, but thought he was ideal for the role for Michael Corvin. And the chemistry. You know what? I thought there was more chemistry and more acting range from Scott Speedman in the second one, but for what it was to introduce, it was fine. I was surprised to see who was his co-worker in the hospital where he works at, and then some of his backstory. But anyways, the film is about a man named Michael Corvin who happens to be a descendant of either a character that we don't really know too much about, and his bloodline has locked up a secret that he may be the one and only, or one of the few people on the planet who can actually unlock the powers of of being a hybrid to both vampire and werewolf, or can be the cure for vampirism or the cure for werewolfism, because of his bloodline, and a very secretive and unknown source of his background. Now that does not get explored at all until we get to the sequel, and a little bit. No, when you get into the sequel, does that get explained more in more detail? Now it's kind of surprising because when you watch this movie, you think, well, this movie's pretty good. It's very encompassing. There's not much. I mean, there's a very exposition. A lot of its exposition is given by Celine to you about the war between vampires and werewolves. It's been going. It's a 1,000-year war. She's been going at this war for over 800 or 600 years, and she is part of a covenant of the West, and she works for Victor, who there were three elders. In every century, an elder would sleep and one elder would take over. You have Amelia, who would work on the east. You had Victor, who would work on the west. And then you also have another named Marcus, who would take over for either one or for Victor once their hibernation period would cease. It's so much so it promoted a video game, Underworld Eternal War, which was released on PlayStation 2 the following year. Unfortunately, that game was only seen in Europe, but you can watch the trailer on YouTube to see some of the gameplay. It's kind of a low angle shooter game. You could play as Celine, Rise of Lycan, or Vampire, and there are different kinds of modes to this where you can different missions where you can protect somebody, try to kill somebody, or go full out, basically kill anybody around you. So it had different kinds of modes which you can play. Unfortunately, you can't play here, and also it's PS2, so there's no chance you can ever get yourself on it unless it's available online, which I seriously doubt because there's no market for it. But you can look at it on YouTube. It's kind of interesting how they do it. They try to market some of the continuity. It feels like a Doom play, or it feels like early Doom, because Doom came out in 99, 2000. So it feels like that. But overall, the film is it's robust in terms of giving you a solid action film, and something that's happened to see between very detailed art and CGI and rendering of these werewolves, and it kind of gives something a little added to the lore, just a little bit. I mean, obviously for werewolves, I mean the only reference we would have is American Werewolf in London, what was on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and maybe the Howling movies, which was very, very um, primitive. Depends when you think about where it came out. So it's very like body horror type of like aesthetics in those kinds of films. This film kind of gives you that, but it's because it's CGI, you're not going to feel the aesthetically um, um, almost Lovecraftian kind of approach this. So, which I'm grateful for doing that. So it allowed it to be just a really good action film. It's rated R for various reasons, but none of it's well, there is some profanity and the nudity. There's like little to nothing. So I wish it, no. For me, the film was fine. I would just say um, the sequel would have to be very, very good and engaging and filling in the gaps that did not reveal itself in the movie. And I will say just ahead of time that the sequel did fulfill that. And so with that, I'm Ray. We'll be back next week with Evie, hopefully, and we'll be reviewing Underworld Evolution. So with that, we'll talk to you later. Take care.